Tom Parker Bowles is sitting at a family dinner, and he decides the best way to contribute to a conversation about Catherine's future is to suggest she's spent years cosplaying as William's dead mother. And the thing is, he doesn't even say it like it's an insult. He says it like it's a compliment, like he's giving her credit for a masterful performance. That's the part that makes it so much worse. You can argue with an accusation, you can push back on a direct insult, but when someone sits there and calmly explains that your wife's entire public identity is a carefully constructed imitation of your mother, what do you even do with that? William figured it out pretty quickly. He stood up, and the question he asked Tom afterward is the reason this whole thing isn't just an awkward dinner story. It's a window into something that's apparently been festering inside the family for a while. Before we get into the details of what was actually said and why it matters, do me a quick favor and hit subscribe to Crown Watch. It takes a second, and it genuinely helps the channel keep doing this kind of breakdown. All right, back to it. So the evening started out normal enough. Charles was talking about the future of the monarchy, the weight of responsibility shifting to the younger generation, and how Catherine had handled pressure with a kind of steadiness that the institution desperately needs right now. Someone else at the table mentioned that the public doesn't just admire Catherine, they trust her. That's a specific word. Admiration is about image. Trust is about character. And that word changed the temperature in the room. Tom Parker Bowles had been quiet through most of the conversation, listening, not really contributing. But when the topic kept circling back to Catherine, his silence started to feel less like disinterest and more like restraint. Then he finally spoke up. At first it sounded like he was agreeing. Catherine understood the role exceptionally well. She knew what people wanted from a Princess of Wales. She knew when to speak, when to stay quiet, how to dress without overwhelming the occasion, how to show emotion without letting emotion take over. Fine, all of that is true. Catherine has spent over a decade learning how to navigate a role that comes with more scrutiny than almost any other public position in the world. But then Tom started listing things. The soft expressions, the understated clothes, the careful gestures around children, the controlled vulnerability during difficult moments, one detail after another, and each one sounded harmless on its own, but together they started to feel less like observations and more like an argument, like he was taking Catherine apart piece by piece and laying the pieces on the table for everyone to examine. Then he brought up Diana. That's when the room went still. He suggested that Catherine's enormous popularity existed partly because she had become very good at presenting the kind of princess Britain already knew how to love. And then he delivered the line that froze the table. She's been very successful at becoming the kind of princess people wanted to remember. Now, you could read that a few different ways. Maybe he meant she's honored the legacy of the title. Maybe he meant she's carried herself with a dignity that reminds people of a more emotionally connected monarchy. But in context, after the list he'd just made about her clothes and her gestures and her controlled emotions, the meaning was pretty clear. He was saying Catherine studied Diana like a blueprint, that she figured out what made people love Diana and then built herself into that image on purpose. That's not a compliment, that's an accusation about her character disguised as an observation about her strategy. Catherine didn't answer him. That made the silence heavier. She didn't challenge Tom or demand an apology or try to embarrass him. Her eyes lowered for a moment, her hand paused beside her glass, her expression stayed controlled. But William knows her too well to mistake composure for indifference. And Tom kept going. Some women, he suggested, became loved simply for who they were. Others understood exactly what image people wanted to see. At that point, it wasn't subtle anymore. He was drawing a distinction between genuine affection and manufactured affection, and he was placing Catherine firmly in the second category. Her warmth became strategy, her restraint became rehearsal, her connection with people became performance. And here's where it gets really uncomfortable. Because the words came from Camilla's son, that changed the entire dynamic. If some random commentator on television says Catherine is performing Diana's legacy, that's just noise. But when the son of the woman who became William's stepmother, the woman who was at the center of so much pain in Diana's life, sits at a family dinner and suggests Catherine is imitating Diana, the implication is different. It's not just an observation about public image. It's a judgment on Catherine's authenticity, And it carries this unspoken question: was this only Tom's view, or had Catherine been spoken about this way before? Somewhere William wasn't present to hear it. William looked at Catherine once more, then he looked back at Tom. And the thing is, Tom hadn't just insulted his wife, he had taken the memory of William's mother and used it to question whether Catherine was genuine at all. That's a double violation. It diminishes Catherine's character while weaponizing Diana's legacy. The scrape of William's chair across the floor cut through the room. He stood slowly, deliberately, furious. Now, to understand why this hit William the way it did, you have to understand what Catherine has been dealing with since the moment she entered royal life. She didn't just marry Prince William, she married the eldest son of Diana, Princess of Wales, and from the very beginning, every photograph seemed to invite the same comparison. Was there something of Diana in the clothes, in the smile, in the way she bent down to speak with a child, in the way crowds reacted when she entered a room? A coat could become a headline. A gesture could become a photograph placed beside one from 20 years earlier. A visit to a hospital, a hand on somebody's shoulder, a quiet moment with a child. Even the way Catherine carried herself during a difficult public appearance could be pulled into a story about the woman who once held the same title. And William watched all of it. He watched Catherine enter a family where his mother's memory wasn't some distant piece of history. Diana was personal. She was the woman whose face William had known before the world turned it into an icon. She was the mother whose absence followed him into adulthood, into marriage, and eventually into fatherhood. William has said before that Catherine never knew Diana, so she can't provide that level of detail when their children ask questions. He talks to George about Diana himself. He keeps her memory alive in his own way. That's his role. And Catherine has never tried to replace Diana. She's never needed to. William has been very clear about that over the years. No one is trying to fill his mother's shoes. Catherine will do a very good job of making her own future and her own destiny. But the pressure was already enormous. Without turning Diana into a contest, Catherine could never win. If Catherine dressed too differently, people noticed. If she wore something that reminded people of Diana, they noticed that too. If she showed emotion, the comparison appeared. If she stayed composed, the comparison still appeared. There was no clean way out of it. And that's why Tom's words carried such a specific kind of cruelty. He wasn't accusing Catherine of struggling to escape Diana's shadow. He was accusing her of using it. That distinction changes everything. One is a burden she carries. The other is a strategy she supposedly chose. There was another reason the accusation cut so deeply. Diana wasn't just the famous predecessor whose style could be copied and forgotten. She was William's mother. Any suggestion that Catherine deliberately borrowed from her carried an intimacy Tom couldn't separate from the family sitting around him. And Tom wasn't a distant commentator making the observation from a television studio. He was Queen Camilla's son, seated inside the same family circle, speaking directly in front of the man who had spent years protecting both Diana's memory and Catherine's place beside him. That gave the words another edge. They were no longer commentary from outside the palace. They had entered the family itself, across a table where every person understood how sensitive Diana's name remained. Across the dinner table, Tom slowly turned his glass between his fingers, while Charles continued speaking. Catherine listened without interrupting. William's eyes moved from his father to Tom, then back to Catherine. Nothing dramatic happened. No one raised a voice. Not yet, but the conversation had reached the exact subject Tom seemed unable to leave alone. Catherine's public standing. For years, the qualities people admired in her had appeared almost painfully simple. She showed up, she remained calm, she spoke carefully, she gave attention to the person in front of her, she handled scrutiny without making every difficult moment about herself. To William, those things were not performance. They were the private habits he had seen when cameras were gone. That was the part Tom couldn't see. He didn't see every quiet conversation before an engagement. He didn't see the moments Catherine worried about getting something wrong, then went out and did the work anyway. He didn't see the weight of stepping into a title permanently tied to a woman Britain still remembered with extraordinary emotion. William did. And because he did, the suggestion that Catherine had studied Diana like a blueprint wasn't merely rude. It rewrote years of William's own life with her. It suggested that the woman beside him hadn't earned trust through consistency. She had engineered it. It suggested that her restraint was calculated, her warmth selected, her public manner assembled piece by piece from memories that already belonged to somebody else. That was why Catherine's silence mattered so much. She had spent years refusing to turn Diana into a rivalry. She had never needed to diminish William's mother in order to establish herself. She had allowed the comparisons to come and go without fighting every headline, every photograph, every whispered judgment. Now, Tom was about to claim the opposite. He was about to suggest that Catherine had not merely lived under Diana's shadow. She had learned how to use it. And the reason he finally pushed the conversation that far came down to one word Charles had used about Catherine earlier that evening: trust. The dinner had reached the part of the evening when conversation usually softened. Plates had been cleared. Voices had settled. The room no longer felt ceremonial. It felt private. Charles had been speaking about the strain the family had carried through the years and the amount of responsibility now falling on the younger generation. His tone was measured, but the point was clear. The monarchy couldn't afford to look distant. It needed people the public still felt connected to. Catherine's name came up naturally. Charles spoke about resilience, about the way she had continued to carry herself through pressure without allowing every difficult moment to become a spectacle. He said very little that sounded exaggerated. That made the praise stronger. Someone else at the table mentioned the future, not next month, not the next engagement, the future of the monarchy itself. The conversation shifted toward William and Catherine, their children, and the way the younger Wales family had become a point of emotional connection for people who no longer followed every royal event. There was talk of school visits, public walkabouts, family appearances, and the strange ability Catherine had to make formal occasions feel less formal without breaking the rules that held them together. Tom said nothing. He listened. Charles continued. Another voice at the table remarked that Catherine had something the institution couldn't simply create through planning or publicity. The public trusts her. That sentence changed the temperature. Tom looked up. He didn't challenge it directly. He didn't laugh. He didn't interrupt with anything obviously hostile. He entered softly. Catherine, he said, certainly understood the position well. No one reacted. It was true enough on the surface. Catherine had spent years learning the demands of royal life. She knew protocol, timing, presentation, and a discipline required to remain composed in rooms where every movement could be photographed. Tom continued. She understood what the public expected from a Princess of Wales. Still defensible, Charles gave no sign that he objected. Catherine remained attentive. William watched Tom more closely now, though there was still nothing in the words themselves that demanded a confrontation. Then Tom began to explain what he meant. He mentioned the clothes first, understated, familiar, never too loud. Then the emotion, controlled, visible enough to feel human, restrained enough to appear steady. Then the children, the way Catherine lowered herself to their level, the way she listened, the way photographs of those moments traveled further than formal speeches ever could. Then the warmth, the small touches, the careful pauses, the expressions that seemed to make people feel as though they had been noticed. One observation, then another, then another. Nothing in the list was offensive by itself. Together, they began to sound different. The conversation no longer felt like praise. It felt like Tom was taking Catherine apart piece by piece and laying the pieces on the table. William's attention sharpened. Camilla heard it too. The change was slight but unmistakable. What had started as commentary on Catherine's strengths was becoming an argument about how those strengths had been built. Then Tom mentioned Diana. The room went still before he even finished the thought. He suggested that Catherine's success came partly from understanding the emotional memory attached to the title she carried. Britain already knew what it wanted to feel when it looked at a Princess of Wales. He said certain gestures worked, certain qualities landed, certain images stayed with people. Then came the line, "She's been very successful at becoming the kind of princess people wanted to remember." Silence. Not outrage. Not yet. The sentence simply sat there. Catherine looked down. Her fingers stopped beside her glass. She didn't move it. She didn't answer. William looked at her, then back at Tom. Across the table, Camilla's eyes shifted toward William. She had seen the change in his face. The warmth had gone out of it. Charles stopped speaking. Tom seemed to notice finally that the room had not received his observation as clever analysis, so he pushed again. Some women, he suggested, were loved simply because of who they were. Others became loved because they understood exactly what image people wanted to see. That was the moment the meaning became impossible to soften. Catherine wasn't being praised for understanding duty. She was being accused of understanding performance. Her connection with people was no longer instinct, it was strategy. Her restraint was not character, it was calibration. The room had gone quiet enough for every small sound to matter. Tom tried to explain. He said he was talking about public image, about presentation, about how modern royalty worked. He started adding context to words that no longer needed context. Too late, William had heard enough. Catherine remained still, and somehow that made everything worse. She didn't rescue Tom by reacting. She didn't give him an argument to hide behind. She simply sat there wounded and composed, while his explanation grew thinner with every sentence. Tom kept talking. William stopped listening. Then William's chair scraped across the floor. He stood, but he didn't shout. That made the room more uncomfortable. There was no fist against the table, no dramatic gesture, no burst of anger that could be dismissed as temper. He simply rose, looked directly across at Tom Parker Bowles, and let the silence settle before he spoke. "You do not speak about my wife like that." The sentence was quiet. It landed harder because of it. Tom blinked, then tried to pull the conversation back into safer territory. He said the point had been about public image, nothing more. Royal presentation, media expectation, the way historic roles carried certain visual and emotional associations. He insisted he had been talking about how people responded to symbols, not making a personal attack on Catherine. William didn't move. Tom kept explaining. He spoke about the pressure attached to the title, the comparisons made by newspapers, the way every Princess of Wales would inevitably be viewed through history. He tried to turn what he had said into an abstract discussion about monarchy, branding, memory, and public perception. William refused to let him, because that wasn't what had happened. Tom hadn't criticized the communications plan, he had questioned Catherine's character. William made the distinction with brutal clarity. Catherine had never asked to be Diana. She had never claimed to be Diana. She had never entered the family pretending that she could replace the woman who had been William's mother, and she had never needed to. The title came with history. Everyone knew that. Catherine knew it better than most, but carrying history was not the same as exploiting it. William's voice tightened. Tom had taken every quality Catherine had spent years showing in public and recast it as calculation. He had suggested that kindness could be technique, that restraint could be theater, that warmth could be strategy. Then he had used Diana to make the accusation stick. That was the part William couldn't let pass. His mother was not a comparison chart. She was not a set of gestures for somebody else to copy. And she was certainly not a weapon Tom could pick up at dinner and use against William's wife. The room had gone completely still. Camilla looked from William to Tom and understood, perhaps more quickly than anyone else, how badly the conversation had turned. Her son had done something far bigger than make an awkward remark. He had dragged Diana into a room containing Charles, Camilla, William, and Catherine all at once. There was almost no name more capable of reopening old fault lines. Camilla tried to intervene carefully. She suggested Tom's meaning had been misunderstood. She said he had been talking generally about public expectation and the burden of royal roles. It was an attempt to lower the temperature without directly defending the words themselves. William didn't accept it. He looked toward Camilla only briefly before returning his attention to Tom. Misunderstood? No. The meaning had been clear enough. If Tom had wanted to discuss media strategy, he could have discussed media strategy. If he wanted to discuss historical comparison, he could have done that too. But he had gone further. He had suggested Catherine knew exactly what image people wanted and had shaped herself around it. That was personal. That was the line. And William was not backing away from it. Catherine remained seated. She didn't interrupt him. She didn't tell him to stop. She didn't use the moment to attack Tom or Camilla. She watched quietly while William defended a boundary that until that evening nobody at the table had been foolish enough to test so openly. William's anger was no longer hidden. still controlled, still measured, but unmistakable. He told Tom that Catherine had spent years being compared with everybody except herself. Every outfit, every photograph, every public moment had been examined against somebody else's memory. She had carried it without turning those comparisons into resentment. And now Tom wanted to use that pressure as proof that she had manufactured who she was. William would not allow it. Back at the table, Tom's expression had changed. The confidence was gone. He began another explanation, but William cut through it with a question nobody expected. Was this really something Tom had only thought of tonight? The room changed again, because that question was no longer about one sentence. It was about where the sentence had come from. Tom hesitated just for a moment, but everyone saw it. William did too. He asked again, more quietly this time, was this the first time Tom had spoken about Catherine that way? Camilla's face tightened. Catherine finally looked up. Tom opened his mouth, but no answer came quickly enough. And before he could decide what to say, Charles finally spoke. Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't tell William to sit down. He didn't rush to defend Tom. For several seconds, he simply looked across the table, first at Catherine, then at Tom, as though weighing whether there was any graceful way left to rescue the evening. There wasn't. When Charles finally spoke, the words were brief. Tom owed Catherine an apology. That was all. No speech, no lecture, no attempt to soften it. And somehow that made the rebuke heavier. Only minutes earlier, Charles had been speaking about Catherine as one of the people helping carry the monarchy forward. Tom had taken that conversation and turned it into something poisonous. Now Charles had drawn his own line. Tom looked toward Camilla. Camilla was trapped. If she challenged William, she risked making the insult look worse. If she openly condemned Tom, she would be rebuking her own son in front of the family. And if she said nothing, the silence itself would become a question. So she stayed still. That was when the atmosphere changed again. The argument was no longer only about whether Tom had gone too far. William had decided that Charles had now made his position clear. The deeper problem was the one Tom still hadn't answered. Why had he been so comfortable saying it? Tom tried once more to retreat into explanation. He said his comments had been about image, about the way public figures understood expectation, about how certain roles carried memories that shaped how people responded. William heard evasion, nothing more, because the question was simpler than that. Had Tom thought this before? Had he said it before? And most importantly, who else spoke about Catherine that way? Tom didn't give him a clean answer. He talked around it. He said people made comparisons all the time. He said the media did it constantly. But William hadn't asked about newspapers. He had asked about people around the family. That distinction hung in the room. Catherine still said nothing. She could have turned the moment against Tom. She could have demanded an apology. She could have asked Camilla whether she agreed with her son. She did none of it. Her restraint became the most uncomfortable part of the evening because Tom had just suggested that Catherine knew how to manufacture dignity for public consumption. And there she sat with no cameras present, refusing to humiliate the man who had humiliated her. William noticed, so did Charles, so did Camilla. The irony was impossible to miss. Tom had accused Catherine of performing grace while Catherine was giving the room the strongest evidence that grace didn't need an audience. Then came the apology. It wasn't dramatic. Tom said he had not intended to insult her. He said the point had been poorly expressed. He accepted that the comparison had gone too far. But the apology didn't answer William's question. Where had the idea come from? That was what remained. The dinner never recovered. Conversations tried to restart, then faded. Charles said very little. Camilla remained guarded. Tom had lost the easy confidence he had carried earlier. Catherine finally spoke only enough to bring the confrontation to an end. She didn't retaliate. She didn't punish him. She simply made it clear that the subject had gone far enough. That should have closed the matter. For William, it didn't. Because an insult could be answered, an apology could be accepted, a bad sentence could be blamed on poor judgment. But hesitation was different. Tom had hesitated when William asked whether he had spoken this way before, and now that hesitation had become the detail William couldn't leave alone. Was it merely discomfort? Was Tom searching for the right words? Or had William touched something Tom hadn't expected anyone to ask about? Nobody at that table answered it. And still, nobody offered the one answer that might have brought William's suspicion to an end before it hardened. Camilla didn't, Tom didn't, Charles didn't press him. And Catherine, still refusing to turn the evening into something uglier, allowed the silence to remain. The dinner began to break apart. Chairs moved, voices lowered. People started leaving the table with the stiff politeness of a gathering that had ended long before anyone officially admitted it. William stayed close to Catherine. Tom remained behind with Camilla, and what had begun as praise for Catherine's future inside the monarchy had ended with one uncomfortable question. Not whether Tom regretted what he had said, not whether Catherine had been hurt, something else. Who had been talking about Catherine when William wasn't there? That was the question that followed him out of the room, and when the dinner finally broke apart, it wasn't Tom's insult William kept returning to. It was the question Tom never answered. The dinner ended without anyone formally ending it. No easy return to small talk. The room had run out of places to go. Catherine rose quietly. She gathered herself, offered the smallest sign of courtesy the moment required, and left the table with the same control she had shown through the confrontation. She didn't ask anyone to follow her, and she didn't need to. William was already moving before the door had fully closed behind her. That was when the room truly changed. For Tom, the remark that had probably sounded sharp, clever, even sophisticated when it first formed had become something else entirely. He had tried to present it as commentary about image and history. Instead, it had exposed a fault line running through the family. Camilla remained seated, caught between embarrassment and anger. Her son had crossed the line in front of the Prince and Princess of Wales, and there was no painless way for her to respond. Defending Tom too strongly would make the insult look endorsed. Turning on him would mean publicly abandoning her own son. Silence protected nobody. Charles understood the damage too. The evening had been meant to reflect stability, the future, continuity, confidence in the next generation. Instead, it had ended by showing how quickly old history could enter a modern room and split it apart. But William's anger was never really about clothing. It wasn't about photographs. It wasn't even about the fact that Catherine and Diana had sometimes been compared by the public. That had happened for years. The real wound was deeper. Tom had questioned whether Catherine's goodness belonged to Catherine at all. That was the accusation beneath everything. Her warmth could be rehearsed. Her restraint could be calculated. Her ability to connect could be something learned rather than something felt. And Britain's affection for her could, in Tom's telling, be the result of knowing exactly which memories to awaken. That was what brought William out of his chair. Because William knew the woman behind the public appearances. He knew what Catherine looked like when there were no cameras waiting for a reaction. He knew how she carried pressure before the doors opened and after they closed. He knew the difference between something performed for a crowd and something lived when nobody was watching. Tom had reduced all of that to image. Then he had tied that image to Diana. For William, that crossed both sides of the same emotional line. His wife had been diminished. His mother's memory had been used to do it. That was why Tom's attempts to hide behind phrases like public perception never worked. William had heard the argument underneath the vocabulary. Catherine was not being Catherine. She was supposedly giving Britain a carefully assembled version of a woman it already missed. And William could not accept that, not in silence, not at his own family's table. Still, once the anger settled, something else remained. A question. Tom Parker Bowles was not an outsider passing judgment from a newspaper column or television studio. He was Queen Camilla's son. He had been sitting only feet away from William and Catherine when he felt comfortable enough to say what he said. So where had the idea come from? Had Tom formed the opinion entirely on his own? Had he listened to years of public comparisons and drawn his own conclusion? Had he heard similar observations elsewhere? Had Catherine's popularity, her image, even the public affection surrounding her, been discussed differently in private rooms where William was not present? There was no answer. William had asked Tom whether this was really something he had only thought of that evening. Tom never gave him the clean answer he wanted, because a cruel remark can be challenged. An apology can be demanded, a boundary can be drawn. But an unanswered question does something different. It stays. If Tom had been willing to say those words with William directly across from him, what had been said when William was not in the room? That was the part the dinner could not resolve. And that's the part that matters most. The insult was ugly, but the silence around its origin was worse, because it suggested that the idea wasn't new. It had just finally found its way to the dinner table.